Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovitt. You know, I can't believe it. We're on lesson 21. We're almost halfway through, and I want to congratulate you for sticking with it. I hope by now you're really starting to learn how to recognize your emotions. We're going to be going into regulating our emotions starting in the next lesson. We'll do a series on that. And we've been talking about emotional relearning. Have there been some things that you're rethinking now? Some beliefs that you have about yourself? Some of the negative thoughts? Are you starting to really emotionally relearn the truth? I hope so. Today we're going to finish our emotional recognition part by talking about stress and trauma in our body, lesson 21. You know, trauma in childhood can cause us then to have different kind of attachment styles that we've been talking about, which then cause us to relate to people in certain ways. And when we relate to people, it can cause us to be either peaceful and calm because we had a secure attachment, or it can cause us to be anxious, right, if that was the situation we grew up in, or perhaps avoidant if that's the situation. But nevertheless, things are going on in our body, and we want to look a little more at that today. Because if we can start picking up in our body what's going on, then we can go ahead and ride the wave. We can learn to regulate our emotions, and that will allow us to bring that prefrontal cortex online and start to emotionally relearn what the truth is. And so that's where we are today. In this lesson, we want to continue looking at, like I said, emotional recognition. The fact that we experience trauma and stress in our body. Now, as a result, in our life, we are often left with the aftermath of a physical and emotional dysregulation. This can come in the form of intrusive thoughts. Have you ever had those intrusive thoughts that you just can't shake, or anxiety, depression, a pervasive hypervigilance? I used to walk around like there was a predator in the room. Am I going to do things right? Is someone going to be mad at me? Am I going to make it through the day without problems? And so there's a whole host of things that can be going on in our body. And it can lead us to different forms of escapes as well. And the good news, though, there's hope today. And we've said that a lot. And there is hope today. We can change and live a life of peace and joy, the fruit of the Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit wants us to live a life of love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But it starts in our body. The word emotion means to move. And that's what happens. And sensation gets us to move. And then we start thinking about, what am I feeling, right? And it's hard to calm down when the body's alarmed. We are often into an alarm before we're even aware that anything is wrong. Often we go right into the emotion without even paying attention that it was in our body and that we reacted to it first. There was a fascinating experiment that was done in the Iowa Carver College of Medicine by Antonio Damasio. He did a classic study which kind of proved that our body is way ahead of our mind when it comes to knowing things are wrong. What he did, he had subjects come in, and they were going to play a game with cards. And so he had 4 decks of cards. And he took the guy's fingers and they hooked up these sensors that measure skin conductance, right? Responses, much like they do on a lie detector. And so they had them on the fingers. And so what they did, they started asking them to flip the cards, one out of a deck, and then, the highest score kind of thing would win. Well, 2 decks were rigged to produce an overall loss, right, in the play money. And 2 of them were to produce a gain. Now, they didn't know that. At intervals, the participants were asked what they thought was going on in the game. Well, by the time they had turned over 10 cards, the subjects began to show activity. Much like the lie detector, they started showing activity from the sensors. I'm going toward the wrong deck. It didn't come to them that way, but their fingers knew, right? And it's interesting. They asked for reactions, but it wasn't until they turned about 50 cards could they verbalize their hunch that 2 decks were riskier. It took even 30 more cards, that's 80, before they could explain why their hunch was right. 3 players were never even able to figure it out, and yet they kept going up on theirs. Isn't that interesting? The fingers knew, by the time they put 10 cards, that something was wrong when they went toward that one and they moved then toward the other. But yet cognitively, they didn't learn it till later. And that's what happens a lot of times. We know intuitively, it's in our body. And many times, we're depressed, we're angry, we're feeling ashamed, and we're not even aware of what's happening. Sometimes it's because it's our normal. Sometimes it's because we're resigned to it. But nevertheless, we don't pay attention a lot of times. But you know what? We feel helpless. We feel like we can't do anything, but nothing is farther from the truth. We have a choice. We can return to joy, but we need to become aware of what's happening first. We need to have an interaction between the brain and the body. God has created us in a marvelous way. We have, 3 different distinct parts of our brains, working together. The brain, there's actually more than that, but the brain works together in harmony. Our prefrontal cortex is responsible for that complex thinking and our social functioning. Our midbrain, that limbic area, is emotional brain, storing memories and processing our feelings. And of course, the brain stem, that lower part of our brain, is responsible for our survival, right? Using our regulatory system, such as heart rate and our breathing, respiration. And that includes the nervous system that interacts with the sensory input coming in to get us to move us quickly out of danger. The brain, has those 3 parts. Now, Dr. Peter Levine has done a seminal work on the subject, and he writes in his book, Trauma Proofing Your Kids, he says this: each region of our brain, those 3 parts, has very specialized functions, and each one speaks its own language. Now, this is interesting, I thought. They speak their own language. He says the thinking brain speaks with words, and we know that. We're cognitive, we talk, we communicate. Although I don't think we know a good vocabulary when it comes to explaining our emotions, and not in our senses as well. But we do speak with words. The emotional brain uses the language of feelings, right? Such as anger or sorrow or joy or disgust and fear. And then the back part of the brain, that lower part of our brain, speaks in the unfamiliar but vastly important language of sensations. So the thinking brain speaks with words, the emotional part of our brain speaks with our feelings, and the lower brain speaks with our sensations. And that's important. Peter Levine says this: the language of sensations is to many a foreign language. There is a world of sensation and sensation-based feelings inside us and exists whether we're aware of it or not. Fortunately, he says, it's a language that with a little practice is easy to learn. It is essential to be familiar with sensations when traveling the road to recovery from overwhelming stress. It's just as important as learning basic survival phrases when you're traveling abroad, right? It's a language that we need. And he says, in order to help others, it only makes sense to get acquainted with your own inner landscape first. And so he wants us to pay attention. He wants us to give the time and the attention. He says it takes time, it takes practice, but we can master it. We can start to learn to listen to our body. I know the other day someone was pressuring me to say no to someone. They thought maybe they were taking advantage of me, but that people pleaser in me kind of welled up. And the thought of saying no to them, and I remember kind of, should I not, and I felt it right here in my chest. And so I was able to relax and make a decision. It's amazing. I remember being at work one time, and And I left work and I'm coming home and I'm on my way home and I'm thinking and I'm ruminating about what had happened, and all of a sudden I start yawning. Now it's around 5 o'clock. I get home and I'm sitting there and all of a sudden I go, I'm yawning again. Well, what's going on? I never yawn at 5, 6 o'clock. I was a night owl, especially back then. I would stay up to 1, 2 o'clock. I was in graduate school. I mean, my goodness, what in the world? Why am I yawning? And then all of a sudden I was able to focus on that yawning, and then I realized I'm ruminating and I'm thinking about what had happened just before I left. I was in a disagreement with the other partner in the business, and so I sat there, I thought, okay, and I visualized what I was going to do the next day. I kind of made a promise to myself, when I go in the next day, I'm going to say this, we're going to settle the issue, and it'll be over. And you know what? My body was able to relax. I was able to relax and I didn't yawn anymore. That was one of the first times I really recognized that, hey, things, body gives us cues to what's going on in our body and in our emotions. And so we want to pay attention. And I put in the lesson some little cartoon figures, gingerbread men, if you will, where you can kind of circle, where do you feel some of the different emotions? And I encourage you to do that. If you don't have the lessons, you're watching this and you don't have the lessons, I encourage you to write me, ron@empowerministry.org, ron@empowerministry.org, and ask for lesson 21. And I'll be happy to email it to you, okay? Well, in order to regulate our physical sensations and resulting emotions, we need to be in the present moment. Have you ever gone to a mall? We're in the Chicago area, and there's some pretty big malls here. And you can go to Woodfield Mall. They get millions of people a year. It's a large mall. And you can go into one of probably 15 different entrances or whatever, and you walk in there, and the first thing you do is you go to the kiosk. And let's say you want to go to Macy's. And so you sit there and you look on the map, and there it is. And you go, great. How do I get there? Because there's Macy's, but so what? How do you get from where you are? And so you scan, and what do you look for? That ingenious thing that someone thought of, and that's little dot. That dot that says, you are here. Well, now you know how to get there. If I'm here and Macy's is there, now I can follow the pattern and get there. I can't remember when I first saw that, but I thought, what genius came up with that? Well, that's what we need to be emotionally. We need to know that we're here. We need to know that this is happening. We need to see that little dot where I can go from here and regulate it, right? And so it's important. We need to ask, what sensation is going on? And then what does that mean? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it fear? Anxiety? Depression? What is my body saying to me? And then, what am I sitting on? What am I believing here? Have I felt this way before? Those are all important questions that will lead us then to what we're feeling and what we're believing. And eventually, what's the truth? If you're sitting there feeling all rejected and upset because someone is mad at you, and you're starting to think, and you may not even put these in words, but your body is saying it, your emotions is thinking, feeling it, and you're kind of saying, I'm just worthless. I'm no good. I'll never be good enough. Well, you know what? That's a lie. That's a lie. And if we don't slow it down, if we don't get in touch with that bodily feeling, start figuring out what we're believing, we're never going to be able to challenge that and change it. And we'll keep going on whenever we get triggered with that same mood. And the truth will evade us. But the truth, if we start to know it, Jesus said himself, will set us free. And it will. And we need to be able to discern what's the truth. But we'll never get there if we don't start listening to our body. Well, Peter Levine again who's a father of somatic, which is bodily-based therapy. He shares a story, illustrates the many different kinds of sensations we can have. And I thought it was a great little story, and I want to share it with you. You know, he says that we have rhythms that go on, and we go back and forth between sleep and awake, right? Breathing in and out, energy and tiredness. You know, we have these rhythms in our body. And likewise, we go back and forth in our emotions. We go back and forth. He calls that pendulation. And a lot of times we're not aware that we can have multiple emotions going on in the same little few minutes. If you can, relax a little bit and go ahead and close your eyes. I know you may be in a class, but go ahead and do that. And I'm going to read you this story. Now I want you to be conscious of the emotions when I ask you, okay? And Peter Levine wrote this, and I thought it's good. He said, first of all, imagine it's your birthday. Now hopefully that probably brings some kind of joy to you, but imagine it's your birthday. But for whatever reason, you're alone. You're in your home, and circumstances have not allowed you to have any planned activities, so you decide you're going to go out. You're going to go out, maybe to a movie. And so you look for your wallet, but it's not there. What sense? What are you feeling at that moment? Your wallet's not there. What are you feeling? All right, let's continue. You begin looking around the house. You went outside, you looked in the car, you called a few stores that you've been to, but your wallet's not anywhere. What emotions are going through your mind now? What are you feeling in your body now? You're about to give up and the phone rings. It's your friend. She says you left your wallet at their house. What do you feel now? Now she asks you if you want to come pick it up and you say yes, but she says you have to hurry because I have to leave for the rest of the day. I just found it, so if you need it, please come now. If you don't make it here in a few minutes, I have to leave. How are you feeling now as you start leaving for her house? Now you arrive, you knock at the door. You knock at the door. There's no answer. The house seems dark. You thought you made it on time. How do you feel now? How does your body feel? What emotion do you have? Suddenly, though, you hear her call you. The sound is muffled, coming from the back of the house. She says, I'm in the back room. Come in. How do you feel now? How does your body feel? Suddenly, when you hear her call, the sound is muffled coming from the back of the house. She says, I'm in the back room, but it's dark. You can see a light from underneath the back of the door. So you approach the room. You open the door, and as you go in, you hear a loud, happy birthday. You realize it's a surprise birthday party for you. What are you feeling now? All right, you can open your eyes now. But isn't that amazing? When you stopped to really focus on it, even though it was a story, you could sense in your body different emotions. There were quite a few moments of emotions in that just few moments. And that's how we are. And that's how quick we move from emotion to motion. And if we can start to notice some of it, we can regulate it. And you know, a lot of times if we can name it, we can tame it. We say that a lot. I think I first heard that from Dan Siegel, you know. If you can name it, you can tame it. And just like we had a while ago, we said that we were emotionally illiterate, and I gave you some emotions to look at and start where you could increase your vocabulary. Likewise, in today's lesson, we've done that with sensations. And we have a whole list of sensations here where we're talking about intense, I feel loose, I feel playful, I feel pressing, I feel mellow, I feel soft, there's a stabbing pain, you know, I feel light, I feel open, all those kind of words. And you know, why don't you take a look at that, circle some of the ones that you've experienced in the past where you can increase your vocabulary, okay? And so the question then becomes, okay, who's reacting? Where is this sensation coming from? And when we can start to realize that it's not an adult reacting, but that it's perhaps some leftover emotion from the past, from our childhood, that maybe it's that inner child that hasn't resolved, that still believes some lies about ourselves, like I'm no good, I'm damaged goods, no one loves me, I'm going to be in trouble, I'm going to die, all those things that children think because they're children. We don't need to think as adults, but we do. When we can recognize that, then we can call it out for what it is. It's an immature thought. The sensation doesn't fit the experience. And that's part of it. When we're over-emoting in a situation, chances are we're reacting to something from the past. And that's why we're going to get into emotional relearning, where we can start to really change that. And so you need to be listening to that. And, I had a whole other list of sensations as well, like tight, intense, relaxed, sore. And you can look at those and start increasing your vocabulary, where you can start naming the different things that you're feeling, where you can wake up to what's going in. And then Peter Levine talks about zooming in and zooming out. And when you zoom out, you can just do a body scan. Am I feeling something? Is my back sore? Am I feeling some pain in my foot? Is my neck tense? Am I squinting my eyes? And then if you are, you can zoom in. You can zoom in and focus on that one area and relax it, regulate that area. And a lot of times if we regulate the body, the emotions will follow. Try this experiment, okay? I want you to slump your shoulders over, okay? Just slump them over. Look like this. Put your head kind of down. All right, now try to think of a happy thought right now. Yeah, probably can't, right? You can't. Now, sit up straight. Kind of put a little mild smile on your face. Put your shoulders back. And now think of a sad thought. It's hard to do, isn't it? You have to almost move your body to do it. You see, a lot of times if we can discover what's going on, we can relax that part of the body, the emotions will follow. Now, if we can figure out why we're thinking that way, then we get into the root and we pull it out by the root. And we'll get into that more in lessons ahead. How do we pull it out by the root? So, things that we can do. We can learn to relax. We can explore and become more aware of what's going on, and we can start to stay with the sensation. Just to notice it there and then run from it isn't going to help. If we feel tense, we feel something, stay with it for a minute. Stay with it. If it's too scary, back off a little bit. If you're really up here, right, you don't like to stay there necessarily. It's sort of like a panic attack. When I used to have panic attacks, I was able to work on it, and I've helped lots of people with panic attacks. And what we need to know, a lot of times, it's just a false alarm. It's a false alarm. I don't need to listen to it. And then I can just ride the wave, right? Ride the wave. And what goes up comes down. And a lot of times if we can get into there and we don't run from that feeling, which we know has an emotional tag to it, and we just stay with it, if we can ride it, we can desensitize it and we can regulate it. And so we'll be talking about that a lot more in the future. But the lesson that we want to talk about today is that start practicing becoming aware of what's going on in your body. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? And then if you can, what's the emotion going on here? If you can then stay with it, you can regulate it down. Or you can ask, well, what am I believing? Is it the truth? If not, what is the truth? And again, you can regulate it. And so there's a lot you can do with it. Don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. If you want to explain what you're going through with someone else, where they can give you insight, they can have compassion with you, they can have empathy, which will help you have the strength then to take this on. And don't do it alone. Do it with God. Talk to God about these things. Tell Him, Lord, I'm all tense today. Or Lord, I'm just feeling down. I've got a pit in my stomach. Or Lord, I'm all nervous about this. Help me. And Lord, what's going on? Help me. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Lord, what's the truth? Start to talk to God about these things. He cares for you. He cares for you. He says, cast all your care upon him because he cares for you, and that's the truth. Well, we've been talking about emotional recognition, and it's key. And we'll continue to talk about it. But we're going to move into now, in the next lessons to come here, we're going to talk more and more about emotional regulation. And as we do, you'll be finding out that you're going to be able to bring that prefrontal cortex back online, and we're going to start being able to find out what is going on. And we'll be able to grab those things by the roots and pull them out and start to live the life that God has called us to live. A life with the fruit of the Spirit, the love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the goodness, the gentleness, the faithfulness, and the self-control.